There's a girl in your bed.
And a pineapple. Am I the only one who's curious about the pineapple?
How I Met Your Mother is a present-day romantic comedy told in retrospect through the familiar guiding voice of America's dad, Bob Saget. It's a show about the complexities of interpersonal relationships, an exploration into the uncertainties of maturation, and the complicated, often hilarious struggles that young adults encounter when navigating the twists and turns of their mid to late 20s. Spanning 9 seasons and over 200 episodes, it's hard to pick out just one that separates itself from the rest. So today we're going to be taking a look at an often overlooked episode that utilizes a fantastic setup to weave mystery and drunken hijinks into a story that leaves us feeling for a protagonist and quintessential beta male, Ted Mosby. This is the Pineapple Incident. It's the 10th episode of How I Met Your Mother's first season, and it is a lesson in how this show utilizes the strongest elements of dramatic storytelling to drive comedy. The episode begins inside a McLaren's pub, like most great episodes of How I Met Your Mother do. As a viewer, it feels nice to meet up with our characters in the middle of these bonding moments, in a place that feels like we're sitting at a table with them. McLaren's Pub is an important location, not just because it's the character's favorite bar, but because it's a place where the entirety of this episode is set up, and our themes are stated. Before we get too far into this, I'd like to take a moment here to touch on the common and popular dramatic principle that writers refer to as Chekhov's gun. Chekhov's gun is an idea created by 19th century Russian playwright Anton Chekhov, which is famously described by stating, "If in the first act of your work you have hung a pistol on the wall, it should be fired in the following act, or else you should not have put it there." Sometimes it's a rifle, but the underlying meaning of this principle is that writers should never direct your attention to something unless it's going to have significant effect in the overall work. So here in McLaren's Pub, we see Carl, the bartender, walk in with some free drinks for the gang. Let's call these Chekhov's complimentary shots. They are going to serve as the catalyst for the majority of the events that follow. The first thing that gets set up here is that Robin is going on a date with a really wealthy and successful guy.
He's not a billionaire, he's 100-millionaire. Why do people always round up?
Now that we've had 9 previous episodes to get to know these characters, we understand that Ted has always held a candle for Robin. So the news immediately puts our main character in a position that is a little insecure and maybe a little envious. After Robin leaves, Ted begins to bargain with himself as to why he and Robin could never be together. The next setup is introduced by way of Barney, table number 4. On the surface, this seems like just another one of Barney's attempts at sexual conquest. But again, in this episode, there is nothing that is introduced that isn't completely intentional. Even this dumb bit about Carl secretly being a vampire comes full circle.
But is there any chance that Carl is a vampire?
That's ridiculous.
No, you guys, I'm serious.
Barney comes back and gives an insight into one of the episode's primary thematic elements. Ted needs to stop thinking and start doing. He needs to get out of his head, let go of his insecurities, get out of his own way, and let loose, which he does. After a little peer pressure and 5 shots, Ted blacks out. This is where the show uses mystery to its advantage. When Ted wakes up, there are a couple of clues that beg for our attention. First, there's this pineapple on his nightstand, which is just strange enough to pique our interest, but not strange enough to seem completely absurd. Clue number 2, there's a brunette woman in the bed next to Ted. And number 3, Ted's sprained ankle. Something happened last night, and it's up to Ted and us to figure it all out. Ted is basically the Sherlock Holmes of his own crime scene, and since the entire episode is told from his perspective, we get to solve the mystery with him. It's fun, and more importantly, it adds an element of instant engagement for the viewer. This element is mystery to the same thing that makes movies like Memento, Sherlock Holmes, or Knives Out so fun to watch. It's high-level drama told through the lens of extremely low-stakes comedy. Marshall and Lily are the first people available to fill Ted in on what happened last night, and we get our first flashback, which is particularly satisfying to watch as a viewer because we get our first answer. But with that answer comes another really important element that makes this episode so great. In this flashback, Ted is obsessively calling Robin to the point of singing at the top of his lungs and falling out of his chair.
Well, that explains the ankle.
And sets the stage for some classic and well-placed misdirection, which is definitely on its way. Back at the apartment, Marshall and Lily are just as surprised as Ted to discover that there is a woman in his bed, which lets us know that Ted will have to find his answers elsewhere. The writers also add another clue by the way of Ted's burned jacket. The writers are solving the minor issues and bringing up new ones, while we all try to solve the mystery of who is in Ted's bed. Our next witness in this caper is Barney, who has been sleeping in the bathtub and gives us a little more information.
Hello.
Hey guys, I'm going to take a quick pause here to tell you a little bit about why I partnered with CuriosityStream for this video. CuriosityStream is smart TV for your smart TV. It has thousands of documentaries and nonfiction TV shows on topics like history, science, tech, and travel. And one of the best parts about CuriosityStream is you can stream it from any device, anytime, anywhere. So use the code Nerdstalgic to sign up and it'll just be $14.99 for the whole year. We now know that not only did Ted return to McLaren's pub, he called Robin again, and Barney set Ted's coat on fire for doing it. The coat mystery is solved, and again, just as in Great Mystery, when one question gets answered, another one arises. It keeps us guessing, it keeps us wondering, and it keeps us engaged. The phone number written on Ted's arm is the next piece of the puzzle. After it's revealed that it's Carl, the bartender, we get our next piece of the puzzle. After Barney put Ted to bed, he returned to the bar a third time, got cut off, and made another phone call to who, we assume from Ted's past drunk dialing history, is Robin. He invited her over, she came over, and that solves the mystery of who the girl in Ted's bed is. Back at the apartment, the mystery is solved, and we're all anticipating the awkward conversation that Ted is about to have with Robin when Ted receives a phone call from Robin. This is high-level misdirection that is just as effective as The Sixth Sense, Psycho, The Prestige, and, well, you name it. For the entire episode, we have been sitting with the feeling that the woman in the bed may be Robin to a degree of near certainty, and now we have definitive proof that it isn't. It's really good writing, and it adds to the drama of what's going on. Robin invites herself over, and we learn that the woman in the bed is Trudy, one of the women from table number 4 who we saw at the top of the episode. Now Trudy unveils the final piece of the evening. Ted exchanges numbers with her and accidentally dials her number instead of Robin's, and she came over for a hookup. Ted hides Trudy, Robin shows up, and we get this great moment of understanding, while Robin and Ted set some healthy boundaries for one another. This is a little bit of a lose-lose situation for Ted, as the girl he loves cements himself in the friend zone, and the girl he liked was embarrassed to the point of climbing out the window. We get a nice little wrap-up here and the voiceover, and that's that. Our characters learned what it means to be friends despite their underlying feelings for one another, which hits at our top theme of stop thinking and start doing. Ted is going to stop overthinking how he can remain friends with Robin, and he's going to start actively trying to demonstrate that friendship to her. It's a great lesson learned in kind of a backwards way. The Pineapple Incident is an episode of a primetime sitcom that feels, at its core, just as exciting and intriguing as any mystery or thriller. It's a prime example of how comedy and drama are deeply intertwined and utilize the same elements of storytelling to great success. Mel Brooks was once quoted saying, "Tragedy is when I cut my finger. Comedy is when you fall into an open sewer and die." The quote is a statement on comedy being at its best when it comes from the most serious situations. When you write your comedies as if they are thrillers or dramas, they end up feeling more real, and that's what resonates with us and makes us laugh. Reality. The episode uses every part of the buffalo. Every element introduced throughout the episode is used to either add to the plot or have an effect on our characters' emotional investments and what is going on around them. Whether it's Chekhov's gun, Chekhov's free shots, or even Chekhov's pineapple, everything a writer creates should be intentional. Otherwise, it's just wasted space and time. But wait, what about the pineapple? There was actually an exclusive clip released on BuzzFeed that showed where the pineapple actually came from. Captain George Van Smoot leaves them on his front porch as a symbol of hospitality, and Ted stumbled across his downtown residence. So, yeah, everything ended up getting used here.
Bloody. This is Scrubs, and when the show's at its best, well, it's one of the best on television. At least it was at the time, and Scrubs brings its A-game, well, a good amount of that time. There have been some seriously great episodes over the years, but today I want to focus on just a single episode that sets itself apart as being, well, the best of the bunch. Mostly to point out what Scrubs gets right when it's getting things right. That episode? My Screw Up. Season 3, Episode 14 sets a pretty high bar for what can be accomplished in a 22-minute single-camera comedy. So, what makes a perfect Scrubs episode? This episode is an exploration of so many different emotional themes: guilt, grief, love, compassion, regret, forgiveness, acceptance, all explored in their own unique ways throughout the episode of, well, Scrubs, which is, a sitcom. The structure of the episode is supported by the strong foundation it builds before we even get to the opening credits. Immediately, we're brought into our three main characters doing what they do best: banter, and support one another. This is a critical component to what makes a great Scrubs episode. These characters are our friends, or at least that's how they're presented, and sometimes it's fun just hanging out with them. It's slice of life in the middle of narrative. The next scene sets up a bit of a low-stakes relationship drama between Turk and Carla, which touches on some potential insecurity surrounding Carla and taking Turk's last name after they get married.
We'll just have one of those modern marriages where the husband and wife don't love each other.
Turk?
The scene is only 15 seconds long, yet these 3 lines of dialogue set the tone for the journey these 2 characters are about to embark on.
Wait, Turk! Turk, whoa!
Again, love, insecurity, compassion, concern, and fear all delivered in just, well, 3 quick lines of dialogue. It's good writing.
You okay?
All good.
The third scene of the show's opening sequence introduces the linchpin of the entire episode, Dr. Cox. He enters a scene planning his son's birthday and sarcastically insinuates that he and his wife should give the parents a loaded gun to play Russian roulette with.
And here's the kicker. We put bullets in all the chambers. That way, everybody wins.
This joke, if you want to call it that, really paints the character of Dr. Cox in an almost cold and insensitive light, something that will be challenged later on. This scene also introduces another key element to the episode, which is Jack's first birthday party.
Will there be a piñata? Because I need to know if I should bring my piñata helmet.
Ha, Papa! Would you zip it, nerd?
The final moment of the opening sequence reintroduces us to Dr. Cox's brother-in-law and best friend Ben as the catalyst for the rest of the events that will inevitably unfold in the episode. Snaps a photo of JD, and I want you to remember this camera because it's actually a key piece of storytelling. Point here is that Scrubs always does an excellent job when it's getting things right of setting up its narrative. And setting it up in a way where each episode can be isolated, even in serialization, what you want to do is make sure that anybody can hop in anywhere and have a good time, especially with a sitcom, and Scrubs is one of the best at doing that very thing. And it's the foundation of what they build here that expertly sets the stage for the rest of the episode to play out. All the ingredients are in the plot, and now it's time for the show to start cooking. In the next scene, we get a little extra piece of hidden foreshadowing by way of Ben's character. Ben tells Dr. Cox that he will be carrying his camera with him until the day I die.
So, you still doing the whole kooky guy who brings his camera everywhere thing?
Till the day I die.
Effectively foreshadowing the fate of Ben. Now we start to expand on the show's B-plot, which is equally as rich as the primary storyline. In this scene, Elliot's foot problem serves as the catalyst and Carla confessing to Turk that she hates his mole.
I hate your mole.
What?
What?
Not only does this make us laugh, it also puts the characters of Turk and Carla in extremely vulnerable places. Turk is in more of an insecure shock place and Carla is in more of a guilty place. This scene kicks off our theme of guilt, which will run throughout the episode. In this sequence, there's a little more foreshadowing as someone literally screams he's going to die right before cutting over to Ben and Dr. Cox here.
Oh my God, he's gonna die!
Ah, Newbie. Perfect timing.
Anyway, this scene is incredibly important because it effectively sets up Dr. Cox's and JD's inevitable battles with their own guilt later on. Dr. Cox has to leave the hospital to go bail a party clown out of jail and leaves Ben in JD's care to run some blood tests. We also get the detail here that the patient JD is wheeling around, Mr. Taylor, is dealing with cardiac issues, which again is another piece of brilliant misdirection from the writers. Now we return to the subplot and get to the point a little bit. Scrubs does an excellent job of balancing A and B line plots all the way throughout its series. A lot of shows will give you nice A-line plots and let you have fun with those, and then just shove in B-line plots simply to pad an episode, reach a 23-minute runtime, but that's not what Scrubs does here. The subplot gets a little more insight into Turk and Carla's battle with his lip mole. Elliot and JD prey on Turk's insecurity, and quickly after that, JD gets an extremely urgent and intentionally mysterious page.
That's a code.
Ted is experiencing some guilt as his band will not be able to play Dr. Cox's kid's birthday party.
Now, even though I never asked you to, that is still just terrific news.
We're now smack dab in the middle of the episode, and this is actually the most pivotal moment. JD enters and tells Dr. Cox, 20 minutes after you left, he went into cardiac arrest. We tried to resuscitate him, but there was nothing we could do. Since we see Ben enter the frame in the background, we assume that JD is talking about Mr. Taylor. There's just one thing missing. Ben is no longer wearing his camera. Now JD is overwhelmed by guilt as well. He can't even look at Dr. Cox in the eyes. What comes off to us as a satellite character dying is actually an emotional atomic bomb in disguise. Turk tries to bargain his way out of getting his mole removed to no avail. It's also worth noting that bargaining is another stage of grief, which is the primary theme explored in the episode. Step 3 to a great Scrubs episode is understanding your thematic tone and balancing it properly with comedy, but more pertinently, driving the emotion of each episode home, something that a lot of sitcoms get wrong or don't even attempt to do. So now things are getting really heated between Dr. Cox and JD. We are now exploring what happens when extreme anger meets extreme guilt.
So wait, you think this was my fault?
Hey, this is an emotional situation, so why don't you just go easy on the kid?
It was your fault. Now get the hell out.
We never really question why Ben is standing around hovering over Dr. Cox's shoulders, and we should, shouldn't we? Should we be paying attention to how awkward it is having a non-medical professional following a doctor around and giving him advice? It's now revealed that Dr. Cox has been sleeping at the hospital for 2 straight days, and he is still lacing into JD. JD reminds him of an event.
Look, you want to be mad at me, that's fine. I get it, okay? But Jordan called. She wants to make sure you show this afternoon.
Which we assume is Jack's first birthday party, and all the while we never question Ben's presence. It's 2 days later and Ben is wearing the exact same outfit, but the episode is so well written that we don't even notice. Turk and Carla's moral dilemma is coming to a head, and we get one of these seamless transitions here, as Turk says,
I hate her for doing this to me.
I hate him for doing this to me.
We immediately get a cutaway to Carla saying the exact same thing about changing her last name, as we understand these two characters are experiencing parallel emotions over 2 different things. When you see this next scene here with Dr. Cox and Ben for the first time, it seems like these 2 old friends are just comforting one another, as Dr. Cox is explaining that he feels responsibility to his patients. When we watch it a second time, we understand that this scene is one of the saddest scenes in maybe the entire series. Dr. Cox is wrought with grief over the death of his friend, and instead of coping in a healthy way, he is burying himself in his work. There's another great moment here where Elliot throws us off a bit. She turns around and appears to lock eyes with Ben, making this illusion a little more tangible.
Oh, Ben, outstanding commitment.
Thanks.
As we transition ourselves away from the guilt and anger, the theme of acceptance begins to emerge as Dr. Cox forgives JD and Turk and Carla come to terms with each other's wants and needs in their relationship. And finally, one of the best things about Scrubs and what makes a perfect episode really work is the element of surprise. The show consistently keeps you on its feet, especially with plot reveals. The finale of this episode is what really cements it as being the pinnacle of what Scrubs can do. As we get to what we assume is Jack's birthday party, Dr. Cox is speaking with Ben and JD about taking photos of kids.
Pictures of what?
You know, crying babies covered in chocolate, people singing happy birthday to my son who've never even met him before, you know, the whole routine.
And we finally get this great line from JD.
Where do you think we are?
Ben suddenly disappears, and it's revealed that we are at a cemetery for Ben's funeral, revealing that it was Ben who died and not Mr. Taylor. Music here fits perfectly with these slow camera moves, and it really highlights the emotional impact Ben's death has had on the character who is famously callous and cold. JD and Turk both comfort Dr. Cox during his time of grief, and we get this whole storyline coming full circle in a truly beautiful way. We get the signature JD voiceover, and the credits roll over an emotionally vulnerable Dr. Cox. This episode touches on the complexities of interpersonal relationships while delving deep into what it means to love someone. It's not only a statement which attempts to dig up how humans care for one another, but also for how we experience grief and loss. And somehow through all of this, the episode's hilarious. It's hard to think of another show that can capture this level of emotional depth and nuanced character development in a single episode while still being, well, funny, like a sitcom's supposed to be. Scrubs is truly one of a kind, and while there are many episodes of Scrubs that are great, My Screw Up is one of the only episodes that I think can be considered, well, close to perfect. The Simpsons is a seemingly unstoppable force in modern media, and for good reason. It is one of the most important and popular animated shows of all time. But with the show's quality shifting so much over the years, it's easy to wonder, what is it that makes the show so special? Or really, what it is when it's at its very best? With some shows, identifying what exactly that is can be extremely difficult, but The Simpsons, well, it's not. So I wanted to look at what it is that makes a perfect Simpsons episode, and I think there's one episode that typifies everything that works when it comes to the citizens of Springfield. One of the show's greatest episodes ever. Marge vs. the Monorail.
I think it's full, sir.
That's ridiculous. The last tree held 9 drums.
Marge vs. the Monorail sits comfortably in the middle of Season 4, a season that creator Matt Groening and the writers have cited as the moment the show really started to hit its stride. As Adam Fruccio-Vulture pointed out, this particular episode was a turning point. Mr. Burns is caught storing nuclear waste across Springfield and fined $3 million by the city. Now, the citizens have to decide how to spend that money, and from there things go dramatically off the rails. The Simpsons was conceived as an animated satire of that generation's family-friendly sitcoms. It was built to be relatively grounded, to take real life and animate it while amping up the characters, not necessarily the situations. But slowly the writers realized that maybe it's better to embrace the absurd and the freedom of animation. That's the first thing Marge vs. the Monorail nails. It is an exercise in animated liberty. Whether it was Bart using robot ants to destroy the school, Homer creating a fire pothole quickly filled with a popcorn truck, or the cowboy lassoing finale, there is a lot of animated and visual creativity here. This was a show that was beginning to let itself open up. The plot of a World's Fair-esque salesman selling the people of Springfield a $3 million monorail with a giant kind of awesome musical number and Homer's role as a train's conductor make for some of the most imaginative moments in the early seasons. Mr. Burns could use a grappling hook to get out of City Hall. There could be a Mongolian VR headset. Every moment felt like skipping through fever dreams. And it managed to stretch that leash while still retaining the identity of The Simpsons, which is important. And while the most important part of that identity, the episode also nailed.
Homer, there's a man here who thinks he can help you.
Batman?
No, he's a scientist.
Batman's a scientist.
It's not Batman.
Marge vs. the Monorail is one of the most densely packed episodes of The Simpsons ever written, and that packing is made up of jokes. This is easily one of the funniest, most quotable episodes of The Simpsons ever created, and the quicker the gags, well, more often than not, the better the episode of The Simpsons you get. Marge vs. the Monorail is one of just 3 episodes written by Conan O'Brien, and this episode shows that that's kind of a shame. Sure, some of the episode's best jokes are less than nuanced, easy to digest humor, like that Batman gag, but that quote-unquote Homer humor is side by side with some of the show's best visual gags, like the popsicle stick skyscraper and the escalator to nowhere, which is also side by side with some of the more interesting jokes and a little bit harder hitting satire. Like this sequence where Chief Wiggums and the mayor argue over who has the power to solve the monorail disaster in front of them instead of, actually solving it. The bureaucracy actually taking them to the library where they both read the actual laws for the first time. Again, while the crisis is actually happening.
You are! Let go, that's the charter.
It is genuinely laugh out loud funny. But what's so impressive about this episode is that it not only manages to nail that trifecta of Simpsons humor with precision balance, Homer humor, visual gags, and satire or parody, but it manages to do so consistently throughout the episode while also telling a genuinely funny story to boot. Story of a monorail salesman of Springfield trying to decide, as one, what to do with $3 million, and the story of how exactly a monorail of all things can go so catastrophically wrong makes for a funny narrative for all of those gags to be stacked on top of. A humorous premise by itself. And that's something lesser shows and even lesser Simpsons episodes often miss. You either get a funny narrative or funny jokes. It's hard to do both. But what's also remarkable is really how it manages to still be a show about everyone.
May the force be with you.
Do you even know who I am?
I think I do. Weren't you one of the little rascals?
The Simpsons today is, like Family Guy, known for poking fun at, parodying anyone and everyone. Sometimes it does it well, and other times it simply comes off as a cheap tactic to get people to project their thoughts and attachment to these other properties and people onto The Simpsons itself. This episode opens with Homer crashing into a tree as he tries to create his own version of the Flintstones theme song, and from there, it's a series of references and jokes that actually lift the episode up, that land. Oftentimes, lesser shows think bringing things into their world or other people make their existence there funny. They forget that references themselves aren't inherently humorous. You can't simply say, hey, look Star Wars, and get a laugh. It is funny to have Leonard Nimoy of Star Trek guest star on your episode and have Mayor Quimby say may the force be with you, all the while mistaking Nimoy for a character from The Little Rascals. It is funny to bring Mr. Burns, who's committed a relatively ridiculous crime, into the courtroom tied to a board like Hannibal Lecter. Even a small joke about 90210 lands here. It is really easy to shout the words, popular culture, from the mountains of national television. Marge vs. the Monorail manages to actually make you laugh without having to scream its parody's presence into your ear. Even Lyle Lanley, the monorail salesman, and his awesome opening song are a spoof of the 60s film The Music Man. And I can't stress this enough, that song is awesome. These are parodies with purpose, parodies with humor. And that's easier said than done. But I think the final thing that really separates Marge vs. the Monorail from other episodes of The Simpsons is something that I think is harder to accomplish on premise alone.
Monorail. I still think we should have spent the money to fix Main Street.
Well, you should have written a song like that guy.
The Simpsons is so beloved in part because it has a genuinely great and mostly interesting cast of main characters, and I'm referring almost exclusively to the Simpsons themselves. Something a lot of the best episodes do is make sure they're all involved and are a meaningful part of the episode without anyone feeling forced into the narrative. That is a tough accomplishment when you're dealing with 5 dialogue-driven characters. Here, Marge plays the role of the skeptic, trying to steer Springfield into the direction of investing Burns' millions into revamping Main Street. She also discovers the underlying sales scheme that feeds the plot. Grandpa is the guy that inadvertently rallies the people of Springfield behind the Main Street idea. Lisa is the voice of the viewer, providing a dose of logic.
I'd like you to explain why we should build a mass transit system in a small town with a centralized population.
While also showing how easy it is for Lyle to win people over. Homer is the guy that both accidentally steers his way into disaster as he pilots a failing monorail into doom, but he's also the guy that manages to save the day in typical Homer fashion by latching a letter anchor to a donuts. And Bart is the guy who helps Homer train for his conductor test, actually bonds with his father, and provides the emotional payoff moment when Homer looks at his son after they're bonding and decides not to use him as the anchor to stop the train. Seriously, as ridiculous as that sounds, that moment kinda hits. Marge vs. the Monorail uses all of the Simpsons in all their glory to service the story and the jokes, each of them individually. And that's a tough balance. It's hard for any show to bring 5 characters together and have them be functional and enjoyable to watch in a single episode. But here, not only is that accomplished, but it helps create a standout 22 minutes of television.
You know, a town with money's a little like the mule with a spinning wheel.
Marge vs. the Monorail may or may not be the best episode of The Simpsons. I think there's probably 5 or 6 others you could argue are just as good, if not maybe even better. But what this episode is a perfect Simpsons episode. It is everything that makes the show so great. It's everything that's given the show its longevity and its place in pop culture. It is immaculate. Episodes like Marge vs. the Monorail still feel timeless. Even today, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to see what makes this show so special.
You're a shitty lawyer, Howard. But you're a great salesman. So get out there and sell.
You, Jimmy.
There you go.
Better Call Saul is a near-perfect example of how to approach a prequel series to a show that is widely hailed as one of the best television dramas of all time. Somehow, Better Call Saul's showrunners are able to capture the tonal and thematic elements that make Breaking Bad so great, and repackage them in a way that feels fresh and new. Funny enough, the title of Better Call Saul's perfect episode is the same tool that the writers use to differentiate the series from Breaking Bad in such a captivating way. The 5th episode of the show's 3rd season is titled Chicanery. Better Call Saul entered development back in 2013 when AMC approached Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould to create a spin-off of Breaking Bad. Better Call Saul was initially conceived as a series of short vignettes in which Saul Goodman would be working on cases featuring various celebrity cameos. Writing for this format was a struggle, and they quickly pivoted toward writing for an hour-long format with a focus on incorporating comedic elements into a crime drama. The show centers around Jimmy McGill, who would eventually become Walter White's shady attorney, Saul Goodman, and follows his transformation from a 2-bit con man with good intentions into the flashy, fast-talking cartel lawyer who cuts so many corners that he eventually whittles away at his sense of self until he is almost unrecognizable. The episode we are here to talk about, Chicanery, serves as the exact halfway point of the entire series, and is arguably one of, if not the single most important episode for our main character, Jimmy McGill. The entire episode plays out as a procedural courtroom drama in which Jimmy acquires the help of Kim Wexler to defend him during a hearing for his disbarment. Jimmy tampered with evidence that was in possession of his brother in an effort to help Kim secure a new client. Evidence tampering is a felony, and a complete confession to his crime is there to prove Jimmy's guilt. The courts and the presenting attorneys have everything they need to disbar Jimmy McGill, yet we know for a fact that he doesn't get disbarred.
Clearly his taste in women is the same as his taste in lawyers, only the very best, with just the right amount of dirty.
A lot of the fun in watching Better Call Saul comes from our knowledge of where the characters end up. However, because we know that certain characters are safe and certain characters are not, the show has to rely on relationships and emotions to drive the tension of the story, which results in a much richer and deeper story overall. And while we understand that certain characters might be physically safe, the show repeatedly puts their psychologies, perspectives, and philosophies in mortal danger. While no character is actually killed off during Chicanery, the episode does feature a couple of major deaths in the spiritual and philosophical sense.
Rebecca!
The opening of Chicanery finds Jimmy McGill showing up to, once again, take care of his brother Chuck. Jimmy has been caring for Chuck for the entirety of the series, helping him through a disorder known as electromagnetic hypersensitivity. This condition exists in the real world, and while there is some debate of the legitimacy of this disorder, it is largely believed to be a psychiatric condition exacerbated by acute paranoia. This flashback sequence at the top of the episode really does a great job of establishing a few things that are absolutely necessary to the emotional weight of this episode. The first being that Jimmy cares deeply about Chuck and his well-being. He cares to the point where he helps Chuck plan this elaborate ruse to conceal his mental disorder from his estranged wife, Rebecca, with whom he is attempting to reconcile. The second thing it establishes is that Chuck is willing to go along with one of Jimmy's elaborate ruses only when it is to benefit himself. Where Jimmy is willing to lie and manipulate the people he cares about in sort of a backwards way to help others, Chuck is willing to lie and manipulate the people he cares about to save face as a benefit to himself. This also serves as a tool to exemplify Chuck's insane level of pride and inherent need to appear to be in control at any cost. He'd rather let Rebecca leave thinking that he assaulted her than admit to struggling with something beyond his control. This is all a great example of how important these two incredibly flawed brothers are to one another. Despite their struggles, they still respect each other to some degree. The disbarment hearing, in which the bulk of this episode takes place, is a seemingly personal endeavor for Chuck's legal partner, Howard Hamlin, and most importantly for Chuck McGill himself. Chuck has been pulling the strings of Jimmy's legal career for years, and has largely used Howard Hamlin as a pawn to execute his desires to tear his brother down at every turn. During the scene in which Howard and Chuck are strategizing about how the proceedings should play out, Howard makes a plea for Chuck to let him handle it and take a backseat.
Maybe there's no need to put you through the ringer like this.
This isn't about me or my health. This is about PR.
However, Chuck is a control freak who is currently obsessed with delivering a killing blow to a legal career he has tried to extinguish for years. Chuck wants to beat Jimmy at his own game once and for all. The remainder of this episode plays out like two brothers placing their hands on the top of a baseball bat. The upper hand seems to consistently waver back and forth between Jimmy and Chuck during these tense, emotional legal proceedings. We've seen Chuck in Howard's hand, and we know how they intend to play it. On the other side of the coin, we see Jimmy's hand play out just one card at a time. In the stairwell, we are treated to a cameo from the Breaking Bad timeline with the introduction of Saul Goodman's faithful security guard, Huel Babineau. We see Huel bump into Chuck in the stairwell. We know that something happened here, but we're unclear as to what. Did Huel steal something from Chuck, or did he plant something on him? We're slowly being led somewhere, and it's coming into focus one tiny piece at a time. We also see Jimmy conferring with his secretary over the arrival of someone important and delaying the trial. It's these little moments that reel us into the plot of the episode, but it's the emotional stakes that keep us living in the moment. Chuck is trying to kill his brother.
I love my brother. But Ted Kaczynski's brother loved him too.
Not in a physical sense, but he is trying to destroy the person who Jimmy McGill has become, and he's willing to do anything in his power to get there. The crux of his entire assassination attempt rests on a recording he made of Jimmy confessing to felony evidence tampering. After the opposing counsel plays the tape of Jimmy's confession for the courtroom, it really seems like this recording is the bullet that kills Jimmy McGill's legal career. This is also the first time that Kim Wexler gets to peek under the hood as to exactly how she came to become Mesa Verde's lead attorney. Through Kim Wexler's reaction to the tape, actress Ray Seahorn is able to capture an emotional state laden with surprise and concern, but there's also an endearment to her reaction as well. Throughout the entirety of Better Call Saul, Kim Wexler has been a character who can see past Jimmy's actions in favor of his intent. When Chuck finally takes the stand, we see all of that work and hatred begin to play itself out. He delivers an incredibly convincing speech that seems to be received exactly in the way it was intended.
That's why I did what I did. Not to hurt him, but to protect something that I hold sacred.
However, the eyes of Michael McKean's portrayal of Chuck McGill tell a more intricate and painful story. Under the surface, we see Chuck desperately trying to conceal his emotions and remain cold and indifferent to the proceedings at hand. The deck seems to be stacked against Jimmy McGill, but the emotional stakes at play underneath it all definitely present an interesting flaw in the prosecution's ironclad case. Before Jimmy cross-examines Chuck, his estranged wife Rebecca shows up. This was the arrival that Jimmy had been waiting for, but why is Rebecca there? We can presume that it is to throw Chuck off his game during cross-examination, but it's really much deeper than that. Jimmy has disclosed Chuck's electromagnetic hypersensitivity to Rebecca.
What exactly did he say?
Well, that you had been sick, allergic to electricity. He sent me pictures of the house. Chuck, my God.
The concealment of this disorder was previously established as something Jimmy would protect his brother from, but this pivot toward disclosure is really the writer's way of showing us that Jimmy has let go of his obligations to his brother. As finished as Chuck McGill is with Jimmy, Jimmy is equally as finished with Chuck. Despite the curveball thrown with the introduction of Rebecca into this episode, Chuck still seems to be wildly unflappable during this cross-examination, and he doesn't even flinch at Jimmy's ruse with the cell phone.
May I?
And this moment is where Jimmy knows he has Chuck right where he wants him. There's a pause before Jimmy goes in for the kill. He knows what he's about to do and considers it carefully before following through.
Could you reach into your breast pocket and tell me what's there?
He reveals that Chuck has had a fully charged battery in his jacket pocket for almost 2 hours, thus outing Chuck for being mentally ill. This sends Chuck into an extremely emotional tirade in which he drops his carefully rehearsed facade and essentially confesses his true motives to the panel. A heavy, weighted silence falls over the courtroom. It's at this moment we understand that the tables have turned. It's now Jimmy who has killed his own brother, and everyone inside this courtroom just watched it happen. Jimmy hangs his head with guilt because he knows that he has just destroyed Chuck. In a way, this is also the moment where Jimmy McGill dies, and the real Saul Goodman is born.
Hi, I'm Saul Goodman. Did you know that you have rights? The Constitution says you do, and so do I.
Chuck was the only family Jimmy had in the world, and Jimmy cared for him for years. All of that is gone now. This slow zoom shows the life leaving Charles McGill's eyes, and he looks like a corpse as he stares into the warm, red glow of the exit sign. Chicanery is a perfect episode of Better Call Saul, not because it has the most shocking twists and turns or the largest connections to the Breaking Bad universe. It's a perfect episode because it truly captures what separates Better Call Saul from Breaking Bad. Chicanery is the point of no return for Jimmy McGill, as he abandons his conscience and familial obligations and essentially assassinates his brother's character in front of his peers and loved ones. It's an emotionally charged expose of a strained relationship between two brothers that results in almost nobody winning, reminding us that even when the world of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul strays from the world of cartels and drug trafficking, there are still no real winners.
Wake up! Wake up, you little Who do you work for? DreamWorks? Answer me, huh?
This is South Park, and it's rapidly approaching its 25th year of production. What started out as this sort of crass and unpolished Christmas card made from construction paper has grown to become a true cultural phenomenon, providing consistent and poignant social commentary through the eyes of elementary school students. Now, trying to decide which episode of South Park is the best feels almost impossible due to the show's ability to adapt and change. Different episodes might seem perfect for different reasons. Imagination Land is a 3-part episode that feels like a feature film.
Are you gonna rape us?
No.
All right, then.
The Return of the Fellowship of the Ring to the Two Towers was also so received that it spawned an entire video game series.
Let me have the tape. No, we have to return it. My movie. My awesome, cool movie. My precious.
And Trey Parker himself has gone on to say that Scott Tenorman Must Die changed the entire course of the show forever. Out of over 300 episodes, there's one that definitely stands out as being pretty near perfect, and it's definitely a fan favorite. Make Love, Not Warcraft is a tightly structured episode of South Park that leaves nothing on the bone. The core of the episode is a biting satire of the gaming culture surrounding MMORPGs. But what makes it work so well is how faithful the plot of the episode remains to not only the gameplay, but also the fantasy genre as a whole. At the core of the episode is an epic fantasy quest, but the writers juxtapose the idea against this backdrop of what is actually happening in the real world. There are a couple of comedic techniques at work here that we're going to be taking a look at. One being game, which is the creation of comedic patterns centered around unusual behaviors, and the other is mapping, which is the process of exploring an idea through a completely different scenario's language and objects. Comedy is like music in the sense that some genres have a much wider appeal than others. There's a saying in comedy that there's no such thing as better, there is only different. Whether or not those different comedic stylings resonate with you is a matter of personal taste. This is where South Park uses the perspectives of children to its advantage. Almost everyone can look back on being in elementary school with some degree of nostalgia, and a vast majority of people have an understanding of the inner workings of our cultural zeitgeist. This is a recipe for establishing a strong connection between the show's creators and the viewers. This part of what makes Love Not Warcraft such a perfect episode of South Park. South Park is at its strongest when the four main characters are doing what feels the most natural for fourth graders to be doing, which is being children. This episode just starts off with children playing the, at the time, most popular video game in America, World of Warcraft. There's nothing really too crazy going on until we get to what is referred to as the first unusual thing. In the case of Make Love Not Warcraft, that first unusual thing is this weird, shirtless player being able to break the rules of World of Warcraft. This is the beginning of a comedic principle known as game. We see this in a lot of shorter comedic forms, for example, sketch comedies like Key and Peele.
You done messed up, Aaron! Now take your ass on down to Oshag Hennessy's office right now and tell him exactly what you did!
Or Saturday Night Live use game all the time.
Mommy! Can I have some more juicy drink?
Of course you can.
Yes!
We also see it in longer formats like Parks and Rec, Rick and Morty, and in this case, South Park. The most important function of game is establishing a strong base reality. The base reality of Make Love Not Warcraft is established in just the first few moments of the episode, where we see our characters interacting as their avatars within World of Warcraft. This sets our expectations, as the writers are essentially promising us that we are going to be seeing more and more of this video game world. The base reality is further cemented when Randy Marsh enters the room to reprimand Stan for his computer usage.
I am socializing, Artard. I'm logged on to an MMORPG with people from all over the world and getting XP with my party using TeamSpeak.
I'm not an Artard. As we now have a firm understanding that this episode will be bouncing back and forth between World of Warcraft and the real world. This is one of the only times South Park changes its animation style. They could have very easily created a World of Warcraft using South Park's style of animation. However, the decision to utilize machinima and assets from Blizzard themselves to construct an in-game world creates a rigid dichotomy between fantasy and reality that really drives this point, and in turn the comedy, home to the viewer. All of this setup work is done in the first 2 minutes of the episode. It's extremely efficient and helps us get to the fun faster. The first unusual thing is established when the aforementioned weird shirtless guy kills the avatars of Stan, Kyle, Kenny, and Cartman, thus breaking the rules of World of Warcraft. This shouldn't have happened, so it stands out as being kind of weird. The shock of this event triggers a largely emotional reaction from the boys. They are shocked and agitated.
Who is that guy? Whoever he is one tough badass.
This emotional reaction is what really clues us in as viewers as to what is unusual about this situation. Now that the base reality of this episode has been established and the first unusual thing has been identified, the writers then move into the more fun parts of writing in this style, which are pattern and heightening. The writers begin to venture out and explore the world that they have started to develop. There's a phrase for this as well. If this is true, then what else is true? This is the question comedy writers need to ask themselves when they are creating patterns within their stories. This thought process allows for a rich exploration of what makes the episode so fun, within the context of the presented reality. If it is true that a player is able to break the rules of World of Warcraft, then surely it must be true that the company who makes the game is aware of it, and is currently making attempts to solve the issue. And this is where the tool of mapping comes into play, playing an idea out through another scenario's language and objects. Take the 2020 Vince Vaughn horror comedy Freaky as an example. They mapped the body-swapping plot of Freaky Friday directly over a film like Friday the 13th, and the result is a high school girl swapping bodies with a seemingly unstoppable killer. In the case of Make Love Not Warcraft, they map a relatively stereotypical end-of-the-world scenario directly over the maintenance and gameplay of World of Warcraft, and they call it out in an overt manner throughout the episode. And this gives the writers a roadmap of how to handle and play with the remainder of the episode. Once this is all established, the comedy of the entire episode becomes easy for the viewer to follow and easy for the writers to heighten. We sort of feel like we've done the work along with the writers to get to where we are at. Because this work was done so well, the writers have now earned the right to do all of these sort of outlandish things we see throughout the episode. The remainder of the episode is mapped directly over the plot of any call to action in any film. and presented in an extremely truncated format. There's the call to action, the all is lost moment, the government can't fathom what is happening. There's even a training montage. All of this happens in just a few brief moments, all while cutting away to the real-world consequences of everyone's actions, which is just gaining a ton of weight in front of their computers. The work the writers do here leads to a pretty amazing climax.
Looks like you're about to get pwned. Yeah!
Complete with themes of vengeance, justice,
Dad?
Dad, I've never been able to say this before, but I love you, son.
and violently pooping into bowls. There's some nice melodrama to round out some of the cheesier moments, and the episode ends up with one final call-out that they can finally start playing the game.
Can't believe it's all over. What do we do now? What do you mean? Now we can finally play the game. Oh yeah. Okay, Kenny...
Which is an effective callback to the first minute of the episode, in which the boys are just trying to enjoy their new video game. It's a nice little bow on top of an episode that feels like it never spends a single second dragging its feet. Make Love Not Warcraft is South Park at its very best. It's a biting statement about the importance people place on their characters in video games, told through the eyes of children, and mapped over an end-of-days scenario. South Park weaves this story through a streamlined comedic structure that is designed to fill us with excitement and anticipation. Through the use of the game structure, we have a rough understanding of where the show is going, but the fun in watching it comes from how the writers use that to surprise us along the way. There are sciences to writing comedy, and game is just one of them. They are tried and true theories, philosophies, and formulas, and when you apply them to an idea, it can take something that is objectively funny and elevate it into something that seems polished, concise, and intentional. We can take something as boring as watching a child play a video game and turn it into something that feels epic, fun.
Well, there's only like 4 races to choose from. So pick another one. I'm the dwarf, you stupid. Log out, create a new character, and log back in. I like Hello Kitty on an adventure a lot more than this stuff.
When you apply the right tools to the right job, you set yourself up for success with a much lower margin of error. Make Love Not Warcraft is a near-perfect example of how great comedy is earned through hard work.
My hand! Very funny, Mom. I know it's Halloween.
The show Modern Family has had more than its fair share of hilarious moments, but one episode stands above the rest. Episode 6 of Season 2, Halloween. An unusual take on the holiday episode trope, Halloween treats the holiday with the same reverence other sitcoms typically give to Christmas or Thanksgiving. The episode is a masterclass in the funny side of fear, and proved so popular that the characters celebrated this spooky holiday 7 times throughout Modern Family's 11-season run. Jordan Peele once described horror and comedy as 2 sides of the same coin. And while this episode isn't that scary, fear and insecurity are at the core of every joke in every character's arc.
Can you imagine? One minute you're happily married, the next minute you're completely by yourself.
From Phil's anxiety about marriage, to Mitchell's fears of humiliation at the office, to Gloria's insecurity over her accent, all swirling around Claire's obsession with having the perfect haunted house. Each character's attempts to avoid their fears and control the situation plunge them deeper into hilarious disaster.
Hello?
I'm trapped in a men's room and all I have on is a Spider-Man suit.
Hot. Who is this?
Oftentimes, holiday episodes end up being standalone events divorced from the overall plot of the show at large. In some cases, writers will go as far as to make a holiday-themed episode into an alternate reality. There's usually a focus on spectacle rather than character development or story, which can result in some really fun adventures. But it also creates some of the most boring and nonsensical episodes of TV. Luckily, Modern Family's Halloween avoids becoming the latter. While the show would try in later seasons to capture the same magic as this first Halloween holiday episode, none of the other attempts would come remotely close to the same level of success. Halloween was a special event that checked all of the boxes to make it truly great. Later versions felt more like hollow echoes of the original family-focused, plot-driven vision with cheaper tricks and fewer treats.
Is it cold in here, or is it just me because I am the frozen lady from Frozen?
Season 2's Halloween makes an effort not only to advance their characters' personal arcs, but to do so in a fun and themed way with just enough Halloween spectacle to go around. The way the show seamlessly threads entire strings of jokes out of one simple fear pushes characters to confront those fears and continuously subverts our expectations also makes Halloween the perfect episode of the show overall. Halloween's center of gravity is Claire's intense love for the holiday.
If there was a new horror movie in town, I was the first in line. One, please.
And her grand plan to run a haunted house for trick-or-treaters, a plan which requires the whole family's enthusiastic participation. As with everything in her life, Claire becomes a perfectionist about the haunted house, consumed by the fear that anything less than total success is a total failure, and that maybe, just maybe, everyone's secretly ready to give up on Halloween and ready to give up on her.
Yeah, Halloween! I realize it is a crazy-ass holiday for a grown woman to care about this much, but it is my crazy-ass holiday.
Claire was a wild child as a kid and projects that fear onto her own children, consistently worried that without her intervention, they'll end up like she did. Similarly, as a child of divorce, Claire worries that if her family isn't perfect, it's headed for disaster. These long-term fears play out throughout the series as a high need for control. This means that besides decorating the house, most of Claire's preparations are just keeping everyone in line.
Check it. I'm a scary black cat. The only person that costume scares is me. Go change it.
In other words, she spends the whole day micromanaging people and controlling the situation so that this year's haunted house goes perfectly. This ties directly into Phil's arc. He doesn't just want to give Claire the perfect Halloween, he wants to be the perfect husband, or at least avoid getting divorced. So when their neighbor Jerry tells him that he and his wife Judy are getting divorced, this sends Phil spiraling. He becomes so consumed with doubt and anxiety about his own marriage, he spends the rest of the day trying to do the opposite of Jerry. But every forced effort causes problems and pushes Claire away. This obsession with keeping his marriage healthy is a common theme throughout Phil's character arc in the series. Bringing it into a holiday episode and having a heartfelt resolution at the end really helps to keep the episode feeling grounded and meaningful. The best holiday episodes of any TV show tend to be heartfelt and focus on character dynamics in the context of the holiday in question. Since days like Christmas, Thanksgiving, and yes, even Halloween tend to be so family-focused in the real world, it only makes sense for TV show episodes featuring them to have a similar core. Episodes like The Office's Classy Christmas understand this.
The name's Bond. Santa Bond.
The runtime is stuffed with heartwarming, character-driven moments that highlight both the biological and found family of The Office while keeping things light and funny. Modern Family's Halloween does the same, bouncing between main characters and their individual Halloween struggles in a familiar yet entertaining way, while bringing it all home with an emotional ending centered on the titular Modern Families. Mitchell's subplot is another great example of not only what makes a great holiday episode, but a great episode of TV in general. His fear of not fitting in at his new job comes to a head when he shows up dressed as Spider-Man while virtually nobody else dressed up. He spends the entire day wearing his Spider-Man costume underneath his suit. On the surface, he looks good, but because it keeps making annoying squeaking sounds when he moves, Mitchell has to work hard to avoid blowing his cover, which, at the end of the day, is how he always feels at work. It's a super clever way to use the Halloween theme to provide drama, explore and attempt to deal with a character's main struggle, and keep the audience entertained, which is exactly what a good episode of TV should do, whether it's holiday themed or not. But a lot of shows don't take this to heart. As an example of what not to do, Glee's Season 5 Christmas episode, previously unaired Christmas, has the exact opposite effect as Modern Family's Halloween. None of the drama in that episode is really tied to its Christmassy setting, and given that it takes place in the past, there's no exploration of any of the characters' struggles or headway made to deal with them. It's a big mess that ultimately ends up being more offensive than it does entertaining. Halloween avoids that fate with its focus on the fears of Claire, Phil, and Mitchell. But plenty of attention is paid to other main characters as well. Gloria deals with her insecurities regarding her accent. Cameron vaguely brings up his traumatic past Halloween experience, and the kids just generally aren't interested in Halloween at all.
Nice fake hand.
All of these arcs culminate in the disastrous opening of Claire's haunted house. A reluctant Mitchell gets recruited to wear a scarecrow costume because he refused to keep wearing his Spider-Man costume. Gloria speaks in a bizarre American accent that ruins her evil village Bruja character.
Welcome to your nightmare, ha 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 ha.
Cameron can't stop telling the Halloween story he's alluded to through the entire episode.
And then the townspeople started chasing me, and that's when I wet my pants!
And the kid's lack of enthusiasm ruins the mood. It's a funny sequence which eventually leads to the emotional core of the episode, when Claire gives a passionate speech about how much Halloween means to her and how disappointed she is to see that none of her friends and family are willing to take it seriously. After Claire storms out of the house, Phil follows her and the two of them have a sweet moment together, wherein Phil's anxieties about their marriage are quelled. While they're away, several kids wander up to the house. With Claire not inside stressing everyone out, and her speech having apparently resonated, her friends and family decide to take the haunted house seriously, and it goes off without a hitch. It's a final wholesome note to end the episode on, which ties together the whole Halloween theme with each individual character's personal struggles. It's in line with the humor fans have come to expect from the show, and it's got a great moral at the center of it all. This episode exposes the futility of running from the truth and teaches us that when we try to control life to avoid facing our fears, our forceful efforts can cause our fears to come true. If Phil hadn't been so worried about his marriage, he would have been more helpful that day. If Mitchell hadn't been so insecure about his status in the office, he might not have worn the Spider-Man costume in the first place and avoided a day of embarrassment. And if Claire hadn't been so obsessed with having the perfect haunted house, maybe everyone else would have had more fun. Because in the end, that's what Halloween and holiday episodes of TV shows are about. Having fun with friends, family, and characters that we all love.
Mr. Foreman, can I light this off in your house?
Sure. And then I'll light my foot off in your ass.
This is the season finale of That 70s Show, and despite the disjointed and empty mess the show's 8th season makes of the primary storyline, the season finale comes together in a way that feels like a perfect ending to the series. When a sitcom is ending its run, it's usually existing on borrowed time and wrapping up a show that is losing steam, something which That 70s Show was definitely in the process of doing. The series finale doesn't just stick the landing, it effectively pulls the entire show out of a complete nosedive, and it's largely due to a return to form. The final episode of a sitcom is almost never anyone's favorite episode. Time and time again, networks have found incredible difficulty delivering a satisfying finale to fans of the respective properties. Seinfeld's finale decided to focus on plot rather than humor. Scrubs had a finale and then awkwardly returned for a 9th season. And How I Met Your Mother killed off the mother that the show is titled after. These shows all kind of fall into the same trap over and over again. That trap being trying to do something big or trying to go out with a bang, if you will.
That's a shame.
Sitcoms are often a reflection of daily life. That's what makes them resonate so much with us, and that's what makes them so successful in the long term. They remind us who we are, the importance of our relationship to the world around us, and the friends we've made within it. When a finale takes all of that and throws it into the garbage for the sake of creating a largely unbelievable and exaggerated final episode, we don't go along for the ride. We actually disconnect entirely. This is what makes the finale of That 70s Show so impactful. It never goes for some ridiculously huge moment. Instead, That 70s Show reunites its cast for one final episode for the show to do what the show does best, telling small, personal stories through the eyes of well-thought-out characters, while leaning heavily into nostalgia to connect us to the story and drive the narrative. You may or may not be familiar with the concept of nostalgia porn. As a phrase, it refers to the current trend of filtering a story through a pastiche of various time periods. Some shows deliver nostalgia porn with great success, like the first season of Stranger Things. However, some shows rely on it too much and end up sacrificing story to pander to nostalgia, like the 3rd season of Stranger Things. As a tool, nostalgia is best when it's utilized as a spice and not as a main course. That 70s Show isn't a successful show because of all its subtle nods to 1970s culture. It's successful because it tells stories people can connect to, while using the backdrop of the 70s to support it.
Whoa! This will buy me a monster bag of marshmallows.
The finale of That 70s Show piles this nostalgia on top of more nostalgia. A nostalgia inception, if you will. It is truly the end of an era, not just for our characters in Point Place, Wisconsin, but also for us as viewers. The episode centers around the gang getting back together for one last hurrah before closing the door in the 1970s, and it feels like we're right there. celebrating alongside with them. New Year's Eve is the perfect setting because it's a time where we can put our differences aside and celebrate a universally appealing concept. This is also true for both the characters in That 70s Show and the audience, as the 8th season leading up to this point had left viewers confused and, well, a little upset. At the end of That 70s Show's 7th season, the show suffered a major setback with the departure of Topher Grace's character, Eric Foreman. In television, characters get written off with incredible frequency, but less frequent is the removal or replacement of a show's primary lead role. When it does happen, the show usually ends up becoming a shell of its former self, while desperately trying to fill a massive void left by these departures. Fans might have been disappointed that Ashton Kutcher reduced his role as Michael to just a few episodes throughout season 8, but removing Eric Foreman from That 70s Show entirely was a five-finger death punch into the heart of the series. And the show's 8th season was the final steps it was taking before completely collapsing.
Eric, not real good with words, so I thought I'd say goodbye the only way I know how. Hit it, boys.
After Eric left, the show went into immediate decline. Eric Foreman was the glue that held the show together, and without him, all of the pieces felt disjointed. They tried to shove this Randy character down our throats as a replacement, and it just really didn't work.
New guy, you're hired. Leo, you're not fired. Jobs for everyone. Well, that was hard, but it had to be done.
We covered this in a previous video, and we placed the link in the description. The point is, That 70s Show was in trouble. When it got announced that Topher Grace would be returning for the finale of That 70s Show, fans were given a glimmer of hope that the show might be able to somehow clean up the mess that it had made and deliver appropriate closure. And despite many of them being turned off by the introduction of Randy, audiences tuned in to see the series off in whatever capacity that ended up being.
And the last day of the 70s. You know, thinking back, it's like one big blur.
You're welcome.
That 70s Show's finale starts off in the absolute most perfect place for That 70s Show to end, which is on the final day of 1979. This turn-of-the-decade setting is satisfying to us right from the get-go, as it kind of fills in the blank that we'd been filling in our heads for so long, in that the series would inevitably end when the 1970s ended. We immediately jump into the exact thing the series had lost for an entire season: our characters just hanging out in their natural states. It's not trying to force anything to work, it's not trying to manufacture relationship drama or anything like that, it's just our favorite characters reflecting on the last decade and preparing to move on with their lives.
Why are we wasting our time talking about this? Donna's leaving town, it's the end of the decade. We should be doing something awesome, man. Something we have never done before. Or this.
There's something about nostalgia that makes us really forgiving about the past. We look back on things as being maybe a little better than they actually were, and sometimes we even get a little protective over the idea of that pristine nostalgia being tarnished in any way. This is true in life, and it translates directly into our viewing of this finale. There's this great moment at the top of this finale, let's call it Red Foreman's foot in the ass soliloquy.
How'd you like to own a little bit of my foot in your ass? How about I drive my foot into this thing called your ass?
Delivering this at the top of the show makes us laugh right away, which loosens us up for the remainder of the episode. This also serves a powerful second function by pulling on our sense of nostalgia and wistfully connecting us to a better time. This brief trip down memory lane primes the pump for a really enjoyable experience. The episode also backtracks on some of the more forced elements of the 8th season. First of all, that Randy character is only in this episode for about 5 seconds. He's just hanging around in the kitchen, watching while Hyde delivers Packers tickets to Kitty and then disappears from our lives forever. It's incredibly awkward to watch, but thankfully the show didn't elect to waste any time wrapping up a character that should have never existed in the first place. The largest backtrack, however, comes in about 1/3 of the way into the episode, with Red and Kitty Foreman deciding that they will not be moving to Florida after all.
Ever since we decided to move, you've been so happy and smiley, and you're never that way except for when you kill a deer.
This is met with much rejoicing by the show's supporting cast, but it also helps this finale feel great because we know that, despite the show ending its run, our characters are going to be right where we inevitably leave them. They aren't heading off to some stereotypical retirement in Florida, selling a sitcom based on their lives or anything like that. They're simply remaining, and it's quite comforting to think about. The initial tease of Eric Foreman missing his flight also hits home with us.
I circled the airport so many times that my finger actually hurts from flipping people off.
Mostly because Topher Grace's return to the show was also an exciting prospect for viewers who had spent the last 21 episodes yearning for him. In a way, we are all Donna at this moment. We're disappointed that he isn't there yet, but this delay in his arrival provides for an extremely impactful moment when he shows up in the show's final act, and reconnects with Donna, which again pulls at our feelings of nostalgia for the series. Throughout the rest of the episode, we're treated to some really familiar and heartwarming connections with the ensemble, and some genuinely hilarious moments with some of the show's supporting cast really getting some time to shine. Everyone gets a little nostalgia flashback sequence while they reminisce upon the last decade. The final image of the series is a nod to the first thing we see from Season 1, which is the gang hanging out in the basement while there's a huge party going on upstairs. It tells us that despite the excitement and goings-on in the world around them, the real party has always been down here with Eric, Donna, Kelso, Jackie, Hyde, and Fez. Instead of sneaking upstairs to steal some of Red's beer, the gang heads up and joins the party, counting down to the end of the decade and the end of the series.
3, 2, 1!
The episode's ending doesn't really feel like an ending either. It feels like a new beginning without the promise of another season. These characters' lives are going to continue. Their relationships are going to grow, and our imaginations are left to run wild as the gang heads upstairs to usher in the 1980s. Hopefully someone insults Red, and maybe someone will actually get a foot up their ass.
Do you ever actually do that with your foot?
Once.
The finale of that 70s show is one of the few truly great sitcom finales to ever air. It doesn't focus on grandiose moments that feel out of place, and instead returns to its roots, providing the audience with a sense of wistful nostalgia while taking a look backward before it moves itself forward. It's well placed, thoughtful, touching, and very funny. Exactly the way any great episode of that 70s show would be. The finale brings us a little bit of closure without causing us any grief or hardship, and leaves us wanting more.
Make sure no one is in the bar today, okay? I cannot have those guys in here making a mess. You got it?
There's a pretty high margin of error when it comes to the absurd. Absurdist humor is usually a game of one-upmanship, which makes it difficult to utilize or foundationalize something for an extended period of time. Think of it like a souffle. If you cook it too long, it gets exhausting. If you don't cook it enough, it's just confusing. There's this weird Goldilocks zone to creating excellent absurdist humor, and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia that has really perfected that recipe over the years. On the surface, It's Always Sunny is about terrible people doing terrible things, but there are incredibly nuanced machinations which enable the show to achieve higher peaks of absurdity time and time again. Which is why if you ask 20 different fans what the best episode of the show is, you'd probably get 20 different answers. But there is one episode that qualitatively might balance the absurdity and chaos with structure and technical detail better than any other episode in the show's run. It's this one right here, episode 4 of season 10, Charlie Work. Charlie Work is an episode of Sunny that wastes absolutely zero time cutting to the chase. The episode begins with a cold open that provides us with an immediate feeling of intensity and excitement as Charlie is rushing to Patty's pub to set up for a surprise health inspection. By the time he arrives, he is greeted with, well, I guess what you'd call a confusing scenario, as everyone is holding live animals and Dennis is painting a sign. The result of this completely insane visual is that we as an audience are left humorously intrigued as to what exactly is going on. And it's frankly just misdirection, to the point of almost being ham-fisted, but it works. In just 30 seconds, the hook for the entire episode is set.
Doing a chicken and airline mile scam today? Look, it is a great plan, okay?
Charlie is seldom seen as a person who is in control of any situation placed in front of him. He's irresponsible, lazy, and easily manipulated, and is arguably the show's dumbest character.
Charlie can't read. He'll adapt. He'll adapt to reading?
However, it's in this episode that we see Charlie as more of an idiot savant when it comes to keeping the bar afloat. An attempt to show us that Charlie may be essential to the lives of Mac, Dennis, Dee, and Frank. It's also a nice change of pace to have him in the driver's seat from time to time, as it allows some of the other cast members' more ridiculous personality traits to shine.
Alright.
What we're seeing play out here is just a basic of writing. If you're going to use absurdity, oftentimes it's smart to contrast that with a straight man or straight situation. Ground it. The concept of absurd versus straight allows the absurdity to land due to the straight-laced behaviors and reactions from a normal person. In a way, the straight characters serve as the voice of the audience and allow us to connect with the absurdity by identifying it realistically. If you only have absurdity without something normal to contrast it, then you have insanity for insanity's sake, and any attempt to make emotion, comedy, or thematic content land, well, wouldn't go so well. This episode is also a masterclass in justification. The first 5 minutes are chock full of justifying things that seem completely insane, but because the writers do the work of justifying all this wacky behavior, it all comes off as being grounded and intentional, making it easier for the audience to follow and relate to. About 1 minute and 40 seconds into the episode, we get a brief exchange between Charlie and Frank about him not wearing any shoes. Frank halfway justifies this by saying,
"Lost him in the bathroom."
When Frank and Charlie go into the bathroom, it's revealed to us that Frank intentionally flushed him down the toilet. That is a behavioral choice that is seemingly, for lack of a better word, insane. Now that we have this insane choice, we need to justify it, which is done through this line of dialogue at about 2:40.
It's an anxiety thing, Charlie. Everybody's moving so fast, all of a sudden it freaks me out. Flushing things gives me control.
It's a small piece of dialogue, but it fits in line with Frank's character and allows something as bonkers as intentionally flushing your shoes down the toilet to reveal more of Frank's character instead of just being a ridiculous thing that we're supposed to laugh at. See, crazy behavior isn't funny on its own. It becomes funny when we understand the reasons why someone does the things that they do. It's Always Sunny is at its best when our developmentally stunted characters are forced to perform seemingly usual tasks, but so many of them and so quickly that they manage to make something as simple as cleaning a bar feel like the stupidest and most irresponsible version of an Ocean's 11 casino heist a person could possibly fathom. There is so much for these characters to do in 23 minutes each and every time we turn on the TV. There are chickens to hide, steaks to unload, and a Frank to paint. We get all of those things, all of that here in this one episode. And as impressive as the first half of the episode is from a writing standpoint, it's the second half that stands out technically. The latter half of the episode is a showcase of timing, execution, and choreography that's done rather impressively. In fact, it's reminded some of Birdman, which hadn't been released yet. The jazz being added after the fact as a nod to the film. Now, this climactic sequence all feels like it's one continuous shot, but it really isn't. Given the way that they shoot It's Always Sunny, that would be, well, completely impossible. The interior of Patty's Pub was at the time shot on a soundstage in Studio City, California. The front exterior of Patty's is shot at 544 Mateo Street in downtown LA, and the alley of Patty's Pub is shot about 2 miles away from that at 111 West 11th Ave. The director, Matt Jackman, hides his cuts beautifully, something similar to what people like Alfonso Cuarón have done or Inarritu. Let's take a look at some of them. The first cut of this sequence is hidden at 9:28, as Charlie and the delivery driver make their way into the alley for the patio seating. The camera quickly pans to the green door, and then they are outside. The next cut happens shortly after that, while they transition back indoors at 9:46, using a brick wall to hide the cut, and they continue to do this all over the latter half of the episode. Using characters, clothing, closed doors, masking, and the cover of darkness, they're able to stitch together footage in a way that feels seamless, and more importantly evokes a sense of urgency. It has purpose. One shots are used for all different reasons, but one reason one are used frequently is to make us feel like we're in the scene with the characters in a tangible way. Obviously, the entirety of 1917 is shot this way, but there's things like the escape sequence in Children of Men that do this very well. The point is, this style of filmmaking requires precision and timing that just doesn't happen that often in the world of single-camera comedies. The level of choreography, prop placement, and timing almost evokes a feeling of live theater rather than a television show. And as an example of this show getting more creative as it runs, which is maybe It's Always Sunny's final superpower, continuing to be creative. Charlie Work is a perfect episode because it takes all of these elements that make the show great. The hijinks, the scams, the banter, the characters, the absurdity, and the creativity, and grounds it all in something that feels harmonious. Absurdity craves reality, but absurdity in art also craves quality, and you get that with Always Sunny. I have a lot of theories about why R-rated raunchy comedies kind of died out in the late 90s, early and mid 2000s. Eventually, a movie gets so raunchy that it's hard to top the next raunchy thing with another raunchy thing. And this ended up killing the genre in a lot of ways, which makes it a borderline miracle that It's Always Sunny has continued to work the way it has for so long. I think the lesson from all of this is that anything can work if you care enough about it. 10 seasons in, and the directors and writers and creator of It's Always Sunny still care enough about this show to try things as out there and as unique as what's done in Charlie Work. That care, not just creativity, that care about their art, their work, their media, is what makes this show special. It's the reason this show has lasted. It's adapted. And I think every piece of media and art can learn something from that. As long as you care enough to adapt what you're doing, people will continue to care about what you're putting in front of them.
Has everyone lost their mind? It's just a game of paintball.
Yep, with one rule, last man standing gets the prize.
The prize. What is this prize?
Back in the day, NBC had what some might call the final hurrah of the network's sitcom. Yes, they still exist today, but they just don't reach the same level of cultural ubiquity. The network's Thursday nights sported The Office, Parks and Rec, 30 Rock, and a little show called Community. Of the half-hour comedy television shows that became popular during this time period, regardless of network, Community was always something of a black sheep. It always took the road less traveled. It always attempted to accomplish something unconventional, even while existing in quite literally one of the most storied and traditional means of building a television show. A large portion of this attempted unconventionality can be attributed to the show's creator, Dan Harmon. These days, you probably know him for the other projects that, make its way across everyone's television screens lately, like Rick and Morty. But the thing that sets Community apart from so many of the other shows attempting the highly commercial 30-minute sitcom structure is Harmon's unique blend of story structure rooted in the classical tradition and, well, as deeply idiosyncratic and offbeat interests. A quintessential example of this would be what just might well be the perfect episode of Community, Season 1, Episode 23, Modern Warfare. The episode sees our cast of lovable misfits all competing together for the MacGuffin of priority registration, which is a fairly logical setup for a sitcom. How does this play out? The standard way would be to have 2 or more characters camping out in front of the registrar's office, sabotaging each other in ever increasingly over-the-top ways. A Community, well, it isn't a standard show. It might have the structure of a classic sitcom, but it's interested in taking that road less traveled. So how do the characters compete here? A school-wide paintball competition that's filmed like a serious action movie.
Come with me if you don't want paint on your clothes.
But before we delve too deeply into the specifics of this episode and what makes it fantastic, let's take a step back and examine why Dan Harmon wanted to create the show at all. At the time, Harmon based the concept for the show on his real-life experience of taking a Spanish class at a community college.
Duermo tarde, español. Una hora más. No real mi coche.
He said repeatedly in interviews that when he first started the class, he did it specifically to try to save a relationship with an ex. However, what he really gained was strangely deep friendships with people from a variety of backgrounds that he normally would not have given a second thought to. This underlying kernel of an idea grew into what ultimately became Community. Prior to his podcasting fame or Rick and Morty fueled success, Harmon was primarily known for distilling the Joseph Campbell's hero's journey into an easily comprehensible diagram.
What is a story?
Oh my God in heaven. Dan Harmon's story circle is a very simple concept. It's an 8-part journey that Harmon chose to represent as a circle, starting with the character in their comfort zone, moving to them developing a desire, entering an unfamiliar situation, adapting to that situation, ultimately getting what they need but paying a price for it, and then returning to their comfort zone, evolved as a person.
Wow. You just wrinkled my brain, man.
Modern Warfare is a perfect example of what both makes this structure work and also how Community is different than every other sitcom in the way it uses said structure. But let's drill down. Modern Warfare, written by Emily Cutler and directed by Justin Lin of Fast and Furious fame, by the way, is fantastic because it's filmed like an action movie, as already mentioned, but it's still rooted in the structure that we just talked about. It takes its silliness seriously, while underneath being exactly what Harmon believes makes for a perfect story. Sure, it's all dumb, they're fighting with paintballs, but the fact that it's filmed seriously gives it a gravitas that, well, it'd be easier if we just move through the story of this particular episode, beat by beat, according to Harmon's story circle. The episode begins with a cold open that features the romantic pairing at the center of the first season, Britta and Jeff, arguing with each other. Group comments on their sexual tension, they brush it off, not wanting to admit they're secretly into each other.
Oh, just like Sam and Diane. I hated Sam and Diane.
Jeff, being the eternally selfish person he is, decides to take a nap in his car. He's annoyed at his schedule he has and how much time is wasted. When he wakes up, he learns that the whole school has devolved into near post-apocalyptic warfare, which then leads us to meeting up with Abed and Troy.
Jeff Winger. You son of a bitch.
He begins to take in the high concept of this world, but there are 2 roving bands of paintball-equipped students who all want the prize. That prize being, again, priority registration, to which he says,
You could schedule all your classes on a Monday and then take a 6-day weekend.
You can do a lot of things.
Again, underscoring his selfishness and making clear his desires. From here, the episode escalates with our characters fully embracing the action movie mentality. We see the group dynamics play out over the course of the episode, with the students forming various alliances, breaking those alliances, and then we get these extremely well choreographed fight scenes breaking everything up. Eventually, it's revealed that Shirley wants the priority registration so that she can spend more time with her kids, which the other students realize is more important than their selfish desires, except for Jeff, who still wants to keep it for himself. After brilliant Scarface and Die Hard parodies, and a slightly less brilliant mocking of Glee, eventually Jeff does get what he wants. He gets the priority registration, and also gets Britta. Over the course of the end of this episode, Britta and Jeff's tryst appears as a looming dread. The show seems to be aware that when you actually consummate a relationship, everything goes downhill, which the characters metatextually comment on.
Something's changed.
Oh, Abed.
However, for now, it seems fine. Maybe, and in a final act probably to assuage his guilt over the Britta situation, we finally move to that last beat, when Jeff gives the priority registration to Shirley so she can spend more time with her boys.
Wow, I didn't see that coming.
Neither did I. So no one feels it? No one senses anything's different?
Nope.
Not at all.
Modern Warfare exists in a class all its own. Yes, there are many sequels and rehashes of this idea later in Community. However, if you throw your mind back to 2009-ish, there just wasn't anything like this. Today, with streamers and increased artistic freedom for creators, high-concept episodes or gimmicky episodes of TV shows happen all the time. The problem is many of them forget that all of these gimmicks or bottle episodes or whatever structure you try to strangely throw something into, it doesn't matter if you're not establishing something that is concise from a story writing perspective. Community is a proof in the pudding moment for Dan Harmon's way of structuring story. And better yet, Modern Warfare is a full bowl of it. Community took an idea that could have been fairly run-of-the-mill or a normal sitcom and transformed it into something different. Modern Warfare is a shining example of comedic authorship performed in a vacuum of creative cowardice. Modern Warfare just isn't an episode that would have gotten made on any of the other 3 shows that NBC had at the time. It probably wouldn't have gotten made on any show other than Community, because Harmon and the writers had faith in the ideas that grounded their ideas. Community is, of course, about a lovable band of misfits and rejects, which we've seen before. It's a fairly common trope in sitcoms, but it also feels like an artistic enterprise created by another gang of weirdos who somehow got their shot and decided to try things a little differently. There isn't another show that has an entire animated G.I. Joe parody episode or an entire episode that recreated the feeling of being in a pillow fort. Modern Warfare is not only the beginning of that ethos, which grows over the show's run, but the perfect example of that modus operandi. Be fearless in your ideas and flawless in your execution. And when your ideas get too big, don't drag them back down, find a way to chase them and catch back up to them. That, when done right, will always be funny.
Pop, pop. Oh, no.